Hello and welcome to the Tampering Podcast, part of the Athletic NBA Show Network. I'm Sam Amick, NBA national writer at The Athletic, here as always with the usual suspects. We got Anthony Slater out west, Fred Katz out east. Gentlemen, we got trade deadline week. As we sit here recording, what are we looking at? T-minus about 27 hours, 26 and a half hours until the deadline. The crickets continue when it comes to activity. I'll be honest with you guys. Yesterday, figuring out what I feel like writing, ended up doing a column on the kind of the DeJounte Murray Lakers possibility that has been looming for months. And while I did enjoy digging in, it was admittedly kind of a direct reflection of the snooze factor on the market to this point. Once OG Anunoby went to the Knicks, Fred. Once Pascal Siakam went to Indiana, Terry Rozier to Miami, an ailing Steven Adams to Houston. We haven't seen much, but I do think it's not a star-filled market this year, like last year when we had Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and fireworks and all the above. But it does feel, I don't know how you guys see it, like there's a lot of scenarios in play. There's a lot of guys around the edges and the margins that are, potentially going to help teams. And I could see things really ramping up, but I think it'll be a Wednesday morning thing. So with all that, or Thursday morning thing,
I was going to say, they better start going.
We better go.
Yeah.
We better go. With all that in mind, before we dive into the topics of the week, we're going to go deep on the Knicks. We're going to naturally talk some Lakers, some Warriors, and then at the end do a little fun roundabout game of kind of different players that might be headed different places. I want your guys' opinions on just the pulse of kind of this trade deadline season moment and what do you think might lie ahead?
Well, if like Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby and Terry Rozier had just been traded this week, people would be like, "Oh, it's active right now." Like, ooh, what a spicy deadline, because those are three high impact players that went for pretty big prices. They just happened early. So, and then, I think the star power has been lowered. I don't expect any stunner, but, we've been wrong before by Thursday. But, DeJounte Murray is probably the big prize, which I'm sure we'll get into a bigger segment on him. And then isn't it just kind of a bunch of role players that are like, are they worth the protected first? Is it just some seconds? That just kind of seems like what it is.
Yeah, that seems where it's trending right now. And I think right now there are also a lot of teams, kind of what I've gathered in talking to people, is there are a lot of teams that are just sort of at a stalemate. And I think there are a lot of teams that are saying, okay, well, we've got this guy, but you're not giving us what we want for him, even though we feel like we probably should trade him. And so we're just going to hold until we get what we want, and we'll move forward if we get what we want. I mean, you look around with a lot of the losing teams right now, and that is the vibe that they're giving off to other teams. You look at the Washington Wizards, and Tyus Jones is on an expiring contract, and the vibe that they're giving out is like they want a first for Tyus Jones. And I don't know if that's posturing, that they are willing to keep him and resign him if they don't get it, or if it's how they actually feel. And I guess we'll learn that after the deadline in the summer and all that, if they end up holding on to him. But that's what you're getting from a lot of people. Our colleague James Edwards just reported that if Detroit doesn't get the asking price that it wants for Alec Burks, who is on an expiring $10 million contract and is an unrestricted free agent in the summer, then Detroit at -2 and 586 is going to hold. That was their record, by the way. Is going to hold.
The play-in is still reachable. The play-in is still those are insane. Where it's like you said, expiring deal, team going nowhere. But a lot of the people that have been mentioned on the market, to me, they do have, like, even DeJounte Murray, like, he's got an appealing contract still in the offseason, where if Atlanta really hates what they're getting, even though it seems like a heavy desire by all sides for that to split up, you could wait till the summer.
You know what? Perfect segue, Slater. I'm going to upend the script a little bit. We are going to jump in the Knicks, I think, in chapter 2 of the pod. But I do think, because Murray is the high-profile name out there right now, and admittedly because I just wrote about him, I want to get you guys to weigh in on his situation, not only kind of what might happen, but what it says about the way things are functioning this year. Fred, you mentioned just teams having a certain price tag and not wanting to come off it. So, I mean, Atlanta is looking for 2 firsts. We focus, again, admittedly, on the Lakers scenario because of the high-profile nature of it. Everything I got into with LeBron and the way he's been using his voice lately, the crazy trip he had to New York, that yet again had everybody kind of decoding what LeBron was trying to say. But as it relates to the Hawks, and Slater, to your point, like, they don't have to do it. He's played really well, especially of late, but overall he's had a good year. I looked at it the other day. Since I think New Year's Eve, he's around 23-5-5. And if you hit those thresholds for the season, there's only 11 guys in the league who are producing at that kind of a level. Sure, he's not the kind of fit with Trae Young that they had hoped for. Sure, they're fighting for the play-in, but you gave up 3 firsts and a first-round pick swap to get him from San Antonio, under the previous front office regime. Like the idea of getting 1 first and maybe 1 pick swap from the Lakers.
Also, Sam, you say it was from the previous front office regime, but I do think the important context is that it was kind of part of the new regime's
push
to power,
100%.
basically.
Yeah,
and so I think they wear that much more as like a move they need to legitimize more than you would think.
That is a very good point. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Landry Fields, the current GM, was there as the second in command at that time. Nick Ressler, the son of owner Tony Ressler, as I reported last year, it was an advocate for the DeJounte trade. Travis Schlenk, who was the GM at the time, thought they were paying too much. Yeah, that part has been well chronicled. And so now, yes, it's not only maybe trying to justify the price, but also on a personal level. Like, it's funny, I was around the Hawks recently. I think I might have said this last week. Like, the vibe is not, this is not like a dude who's banging down the front office's door saying, I hate it here, let me get out of town. It's not that at all. DeJounte is in a good place. I don't get the sense he's going to be upset if he doesn't get traded. Lately their vibe and their chemistry seems to be pretty good. They almost beat the Clippers the other night after winning 3 in a row. Again, I think
they had a good homestand. I was there for the Warriors win that they had in overtime, which was
right.
It was a great vibe, and they won, and they had just beaten the Suns. So yeah, no, I agree. And also the play-in is so forgiving in the East that they're almost guaranteed to at least slip in the play-in, because just look at the records below them. And they made noise out of the play-in last year. If people remember, they actually beat the Heat.
Well, that's the question. Like, this is what's challenging for them, right, Fred? Is that, like, I wrote this, like, you go back to the a couple of years back, they make the East Finals. It now looks like their vision was off, but they were, pondering title contention at that time and wondering how can we take the next step, and we just need to add a guy. DeJounte wasn't that guy, but like getting those assets in a Lakers type deal is not going to right the wrong in the past. It's not even close to what you gave up, and it's going to make you a worse team. If you get Jalen Hood-Schifino back, D'Angelo Russell that maybe you reroute somewhere else, that's not getting it done. You're not going to get Austin Reeves. I do think, though, it all for me kind of leads to this, admitting that I focused on the Lakers because I always find their situation very interesting. Lest we forget that DeJounte Murray is available for consideration for 28 other teams as well. I've heard Brooklyn at different times as a possibility. They're trying to keep things going out there with Mikal Bridges. So that, I guess, is kind of the asterisk to my column, is that, in the next 26 hours, it wouldn't shock me if we had a little noise elsewhere.
I think we're going to hear Brooklyn's name come up with basically any guard who's in his prime and has an all-star under his name already. I mean, that's a team that, maybe they end up trading Royce O'Neal. I don't think they're trying to just give away Dorian Finney-Smith, who's under contract for next year too. They are not a good team. I don't really know what Spencer Dinwiddie's value is if he gets traded. I imagine it's more as like a $20 million expiring than because someone is going out of their way to get Spencer Dinwiddie. With Brooklyn, there's something going on there where they're like, we can't bottom out. And I don't know if it's Sean Marks, ownership, whatever else, but clearly they are under some sort of mandate of like, we cannot bottom out. That is not the strategy we're going to take. We're going to save up these other picks we have from other teams and try to flip them elsewhere. And I think we're going to see them get in on any guard who might be available, who they feel like is going to fit next to Mikal Bridges. And by the way, they're not really at all listening to offers for Mikal Bridges. Teams who call about Mikal Bridges are just like being shooed away. I could see other teams getting in on the DeJounte sweepstakes, by the way, ones that we haven't heard really anything about, who could use an athletic point guard, who feel like maybe they could use a little bit of a shakeup in their roster build. I could see him ending up, whether it's this deadline or this summer, I could see him ending up with a team that's not one of the regulars that we keep hearing about. I don't think the Knicks are really as involved as some reports have said they are. I don't think there's really been that much contact there. The Lakers are the obvious one, but like I could see some other teams coming out of the woodworks for Murray.
No, I agree. Let's kind of use that to get into the team you cover, Fred. Okay, like what you said about DeJounte, I agree with it. The noise about the Knicks has been overstated. I've heard the same. But the Knicks as a whole, Fred, are not only, I mean, I think they've officially gone to the top of the power rankings of surprise teams this season. You know what I mean? Like Minnesota's up there, OKC's up there. There's some really good stories, but the Knicks being good is not unexpected. The Knicks being this good is unexpected. And then the Knicks, being, having half their team in the ER, so to speak, and continuing to win games is even more unexpected. Within all that, we talk about DeJounte Murray and follow the thread here, represented by Clutch Sports. LeBron James, another guy represented by Clutch Sports. I'll be honest, I'm such a sucker for LeBron's kind of annual power play, annual passive aggressive games, and his visit to New York when he comes through and just has this absolute, string of social media and even in person, kind of coded messaging, the hourglass tweet that is, kind of been heard around the basketball world at this point, and that he chose not to explain. The question about his player option for this coming summer that he chose not to address and said he had not thought about. The choice to walk into the Garden wearing sneakers with a colorway that had the Knicks colors on them, while yelling at the cameras and saying, "Mr. James is in the Garden." Like that's a choice. Talking to Lisa Salters post game after he, kind of leads a victory over the Knicks with the Knicks towel draped over his shoulders, raving about Jalen Brunson. And then, oh, by the way, from a timing standpoint, I think it was Stefan Bondy who had reported first that from the New York Post that Rich Paul and Leon Rose, their kind of long, icy relationship and the impasse had been fixed, which I had heard that was the case before, admittedly just hadn't gone down that road. I think that's been fixed for longer than people realize. But it matters, right? Because now from a perception standpoint, whether it's LeBron or any other Clutch client, it's kind of like that gateway is open again. All of which is to say, Fred, these are good times for that team you cover. They're not only winning games, but they're kind of kissing babies and making old friends again. How do you kind of see all of that stuff?
Well, my first thing that I'm going to say is I have not taken enough psychology classes to be able to break down what is going on in LeBron James's social media and press conferences.
Right.
I just can't do it. I have no clue. I will say that the entire sequence kind of gave me 2018 LeBron vibes. Remember those 2018 Cavs leading into the deadline where that was the Isaiah Thomas Cavs team, where that team was kind of swandering and it was LeBron and everybody.
You're going
else.
too far back though, brother. You're going too far back. 2022, he's not real thrilled, and he decides to walk and talk with our Jason Lloyd at Cleveland All-Star weekend and talk glowingly about his time with the Cavs and how a return could still be in the cards. And next thing you know, he's sitting down with Rich Paul and LeBron and Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka, and they're having a talk about some of this rising tension. I think we almost lose track at times of how often something like this has happened.
Yeah, that's very true. You're right. It kind of happened last year too, leading into them making the Westbrook trade for Vanderbilt and all those guys. Yeah, I mean, you're completely right. I will not read into LeBron stuff because I don't think any of us have any idea other than the fact that we know he's not completely pleased with that situation and would like to see changes in some fashion or form. As for the Knicks, they're playing really good ball. The problem is that we not only is so much of their roster hurt, but we have no idea of any of the severity of any of the injuries. Did you guys see Tom? I just want to give people a glimpse of what it is like to cover a coach when he does not want to put out any injury news whatsoever. Did you guys see Tom Thibodeau's pregame press conference moment where he fielded 8 consecutive questions about the OG Anunoby inflammation injury?
No.
And refused to answer any of them? It was a moment I was really
I feel like we should get this audio and incorporate it in the pod. That sounds wonderful.
It was a moment I was really proud of, where it was, if there was any update on OG or Quentin Grimes beyond tonight, no, not really, just trust medical. Are they considered day-to-day? And until they clear them, Is the medical looking for anything with OG? Just wait and get the reports from them. Is OG participating in shoot-arounds? Not really. Is OG going from questionable earlier to out of the game? Nope, it's just medical. It doesn't matter. Inflammation is more of a symptom than an injury. What's the actual injury? Again, it's all medical. This went on for 8 questions. 8 questions. We don't know what the OG Anunoby injury is. We don't know how long he's going to be out for. Jalen Brunson hurt his ankle yesterday. We're yet to find out any information about that. Josh Hart got hurt in yesterday's game. Yet to find out any information about that. Mitchell Robinson's already out. Isaiah Hartenstein is playing through an Achilles thing right now. Quentin Grimes is out with a knee injury. If you go through their roster, the top 7 guys from opening day are actually not available if Brunson and Hart are going to be out. Obviously, they traded 2 of them in Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. But the guy who they traded them for, OG Anunoby, is also out right now. And we don't know what the long-term situation is going to be on that. So at some point, look, Tibbs is playing guys tons of minutes. At some point, that's going to catch up to them if it hasn't already. And it kind of has in some cases, like Hart. That's an overuse thing. He's talked about it openly. The Hartenstein injury, that's an overuse thing. The rest of them, we don't really know the details. But it's very odd to see everybody getting injured just about every other night, and yet for them to keep winning games too, even if they almost blew that one yesterday against Memphis.
So where does that leave them, do you think, from the trade deadline standpoint, with, Leon Rose and World Wide West and Frank Zanon and that whole group figuring out what they want to do with the roster? How do the injuries impact that?
Yeah, I should have mentioned also Julius Randle has a dislocated shoulder.
Yes, indeed.
And we're not 100% sure on the timeline of that one either. 2 to 3 weeks till reevaluation, and then we'll see. As for the deadline, I don't anticipate them sticking their heads into anything that's like a huge deal. But I do think the intention is for them to make some kind of trade. The offense really craters with Jalen Brunson off the court, especially after they traded away Quickley and RJ Barrett, who were so important in their bench units. I know they've really talked with Toronto about Bruce Brown. I could see that being something that happened. I think there's a deal there that makes sense. The Knicks have 4 protected picks from other teams. They have the Evan Fournier contract. They could do one of those protecteds to Toronto along with Fournier for Bruce Brown. I think that could make sense. I don't know if Toronto is going to want a 2024 first round pick. And I think that's something that's been a theme in the league so far around trade season this year, which is that a lot of teams, because the 2024 draft is considered not a very good one, there are a lot of teams that aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily prioritizing those 2024 picks, and considering Toronto might end up with 3 2024 picks without even trading for another. I could see them wanting a 2025 or beyond, while the Knicks are still trying to keep as many future picks as they can because they want to make that star trade this summer. I could see them going after just an Alec Burks type, trying to get him from Detroit. But something like that, I think, is the most likely scenario for them if they make a move at all. They've been taking offers on Quentin Grimes. I don't know if they've gotten very far on any of those offers also.
Man, that Bruce Brown possibility, Slater, I'm curious what you think of that. The idea of Bruce after getting OG, and this might be a little bit of hyperbole, but it makes me think of the Clippers from a defensive wing strength standpoint, right?
I just think it's funny that the Raptors and Knicks, the Knicks are suing the Raptors, yet they just continue to make these like big trades. I don't know. Sorry, continue your analysis. That's
funny. Fair. No, it's fair. It's business is business. Later, go watch The Godfather. You know what I mean? Like, you just got to do it. But yeah, Bruce Brown would be a wonderful fit. You talk defensively, that they already are a bit of a terror. I think that would be a tremendous move and would make them kind of the trade deadline winners.
By the way, but I mean, Bruce Brown should be desired by like 10 contenders is too strong because there aren't 10 actual contenders probably in the league, but like 10 playoff teams should be after Bruce Brown and if the price is only a protected first, like I said, a lot of teams should be in on that.
Guys, real quick, we acted like it was slow, like it was never going to heat up, but man, we got huge news here. The Utah Jazz are trading Simone Fontecchio to the Detroit Pistons for a 2024 second round pick. So
and moving on. So that, the one thing that would tell me though is, Utah, once again, Danny Ainge is not like seeing that they're in the play-in mix and playing a little bit over their heads and like, oh, let's chase something down, right? It's still more like stick with the plan. Rotation players are available. Nobody's like, I'm not saying Lauri Markkanen is suddenly going to be on the move, but they have role players, right? The Colin Sextons of the world, the Kelly Olynyk's that would probably
Jordan
be more
Clarkson.
available. Yeah, Jordan Clarkson. If you're willing to give up some stuff.
Yeah, I don't think this is the time for Danny to swing big, so to speak. But man, it seems I think that's coming. We know how he's wired. We know kind of his background in Boston, where he was always seemingly on the brink of big deals for so many years. And he's always got his kind of hands in it, but doesn't always hit the button, so to speak. But yeah, Utah is another one interesting to keep tracking. Slater, let's swing it to your squad, brother.
Yeah.
The Warriors, this is not necessarily trade deadline related because I don't think, not to kind of steal your thunder, I don't think we anticipate Klay Thompson being on the move, but continued struggles for that team. They hit the road. Steph's still playing at an elite level. Jonathan Kuminga taking off and really looking like he's turning into something. And then the deadline where you've got so many questions about what directions they might go. Andrew Wiggins, at this point seems pretty clear is the guy that is most, kind of likely / kind of possible to be talked about at least. But let's do kind of detour and get your perspective on what was such an interesting sports moment the other night. You're in that Warriors locker room. I don't know why I'm blanking on what game that was. Who did they? Brooklyn. They beat Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Klay for how many times as far as him not closing? Was it
This
two of the previous three?
is 2 out of the last 3, and really it would have been 3 of 3 because he didn't close with Klay in the first half in Atlanta, but then Andrew Wiggins hurt his foot, so they did close with him down the stretch. But Steve Kerr's clearly trending this direction. It's 3 in a row, and then the one that people forget, the first one that really ever he didn't, he went away from Klay Thompson in crunch time was in Phoenix back in December, the same night that Draymond hit Nurkic. And Klay gave a pretty similar post-game interview in the locker room that night about just the challenges of it. And honestly, was more upset that night. He was brooding around on the bench. He hit a cup rack over. He was kind of yelling towards the direction of the coaches when they benched him that night because it was the first time he'd ever dealt with it. But nobody talked about it post-game because Draymond was on his way to an indefinite suspension from something else that happened that night. So it's something he's been dealing with really from then, this kind of trend away. And I mean, you mentioned it. I think you're more talking about just it seems like it was stark to a lot of people to see, an athlete who is open and transparent, by the way, typically in his interviews, dealing with, kind of career mortality. I mean, he's still got years left in the league, but dealing with just fading from being a guaranteed closing option because he's a star in the league, and he's just not that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the vulnerability is what jumped out, I think, to people. And to be honest, I mean, the internet sucks in general, just if we're being honest. So, I see vulnerability. A lot of people saw, acted like it was sad. And our Marcus Thompson wrote a great column about Klay and basically kind of checked that idea that it was sad. He talked about other athletes who have had, much, much tougher declines. My favorite reference was him talking about Jose Canseco batting 142 in the minor leagues, when he was still trying to hang on. Klay's not there by any means. He's just not having a Klay level season. The other part that I honestly loved is that because you talk to Klay in the locker room, whereas you guys know, we continue to fight for access to be in the locker room and to get these kinds of raw moments because that is where these guys live and kind of where they breathe professionally. Klay's choice to be honest, as you and I don't know how many people were there, but Tim Bontemps from ESPN was right next to you. It's just you got the real perspective from Klay, and then you even had stuff on the side. I chuckled like I think a lot of people when Draymond chimes in and says,
I can set up the scene for you if you want, and we can start in
Tell me.
Atlanta a couple nights before because he goes 4-19 in the Atlanta game, and I mentioned earlier he probably wouldn't have closed if Andrew Wiggins was available, but he did close, and he was not good down the stretch. He missed 3 shots in overtime, and his jumper was way off, and he was pretty despondent about his performance. Right? I mean, he was probably the reason they lost the game that Steph Curry scored 60 points. You guys probably remember. And I tried to get him in the locker room that night, and I got one question in, and he's like, I'm just going to go see my family. Like, he just did not want to talk, and he kind of bolted from the locker room. And again, he's not going to the podium because he's, the Warriors typically who is the stars of the game will go to the podium. They don't, put the guy that went 4-19, even though it's the bigger story. Even though no Andrew Wiggins in Brooklyn, Steve Kerr just says, forget about it. I'm closing with Guy Santos, which made the story even more wild because this was a guy who, like, honestly, the NBA community probably had never even heard of him.
Slater. I looked at the TV and literally was like, who the hell is that guy in the Warriors jersey?
Yeah. Hustling too, and Steve Kerr was just fist pumping. He compared him to
like they let a
JTA.
fan come play for the night. I didn't know who he was.
He was running back in transition defense, and if a fan was doing that, Steve Kerr was putting him in the lineup. So that part was stark, obviously. And then, we kind of get in the locker room, and I know Clay's not going to the podium again, and like he hadn't even gone to the shower yet. He's still sitting there kind of, in like the warm up or whatever you want to call it. And I was like, Clay, can I get you for a couple minutes? And he just turned and went, I'm an open book, buddy. I'm an open book. And I was like, all right, cool. So, and then I think, other reporters saw like, oh, Clay's about to basically hold like a willing presser over here, whatever you want to call it, scrum. So I don't know, 4 or 5 of us maybe crowded around. And I mean, people saw the video. It was weird because Clay clearly is like willing to like really kind of go down a little bit of a vulnerable road. I hadn't even gotten to the questions about getting benched yet. I was more starting with like the struggles he was under. But Draymond walks out of the shower singing. I didn't even know that's what he was singing, but it was this Oliver Twist show tune. I'm sure we were in New York. I'm sure he like saw it the night before or something like that. But he's la da da. They just won. That's the thing. Like he's spinning
Fred, we got
out.
Slater singing on the pod. Can we get a few more bars, please? That wasn't enough.
Anything or something. I don't know. People can watch the video. But he turns the corner and he sees we're crowding Klay Thompson. He knows what the story is, and the way I read it, he really wanted to turn the temperature down. Like, hey, this doesn't matter as much. Like, why is the story of the night have to be Klay Thompson not getting benched? They won. I think that's what he's trying to do. And you guys can hear him basically be like, oh, I got benched in game 5 of the finals. Who the F cares? But my point to him at the time, and the thing is, like, the press conference or whatever, the scrum stops for a second. And then I start talking to Draymond. And I'm like, I haven't even asked him that yet.
That was my favorite part.
Yeah. And he's like, well, you're going to. I know you're going to.
No, like, you said I haven't even asked that yet, but I guess I will now.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, well, you were going to.
You look like you were going to.
Yeah. And it was just that was stark. And then he, by the way, keeps singing Oliver Twist as Clay's going through this thing.
That's why we gotta have locker room. That's locker room, baby. That's great.
No, I agree with you. That access I've always thought is better. I wish there was more scrums now. But yeah, I mean, all that to say, I mean, this is just like the place that not only Klay Thompson's in, but right, doesn't he kind of represent what the dynasty's in right now? Right, they leaped ahead of the Rockets yesterday to get into 11th in the West, and I think a lot of people are kind of like wondering, like, are they the team of the deadline? Can they, rattle the league with some big move to like, resurrect a dynasty that seems to be fading? And like, the answer is probably no, very likely no. They're stuck with some of these contracts. They're going to try to chase down a play-in and probably have to try to play their way in through the play-in and make any noise. But they got a lot of, honestly, the best part of their season, at least internally, is like the growth of the young guys. And it's Kuminga's rise, as you mentioned. Moses Moody's had some moments. They've had these weirder, situations like the Guy Santos one you mentioned the other night. And like that to me is more important for the franchise over the next couple months, is like, building up some of the youth. So they're either better rotation players next season or better assets to go get Steph Curry older help this summer. But I don't expect Klay Thompson to be moved. We can get into why. I was
going to say, just to make sure we give the people what they want here on trade deadline week, give us a breakdown on the Klay and why he won't be moved.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's $43 million expiring, which is two reasons that important. Number one, that's like hard to get to, right? You have to like go find $43 million of like aggregatable contracts that you think is like will help within the rotation. And by the way, another team is not like beating down their doors to try to get Klay, so the offers are not even very good anyways. And it's valuable to the Warriors, the $43 million expiring, by the way, because like they're trying to get under the second apron this summer, and getting Klay either from 43 down to 20 if he comes back, or 43 down to 0 if he doesn't come back, is huge for the duck in the apron. And then the other thing is like, like it is Klay Thompson. Like he's going to have a statue out in front of Chase Center. Sam, you're around. Like you know what he is locally, just as a legend. And maybe you need to be a little bit more cold-blooded in business. But I just get the sense from the Warriors that there's no desire to make a move that's really not going to move the needle that much, anyways. To get a little bit better within their rotation by chopping off the head of a statue guy.
Well, especially in midseason, right? That to me, the important distinction. It's funny. Yesterday, friend and colleague Om Youngmasuk had a good piece on ESPN about what it's like for players to get traded midseason. All kinds of anecdotes about, okay, yes, they make a ton of money, but there's a real life component. Their families are uprooted, school systems for their kids, sneakers, clothes, all these different things. Like midseason trades are not real enjoyable for the player. To do that to Klay and have him going from a Warriors jersey to something else.
They would be tapping him on the shoulder in an Indianapolis hotel tomorrow and telling Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Steve Kerr this, like Klay's gone.
As opposed to, like, let's say, hypothetically, not reporting, but like, let's say this summer they sign a trade scenario, something like that. Like, you can say, all right, when are we going to go to Klay's house to sit on his couch and show him respect and talk to him about how we see the situation?
How about this example, Sam? It was basically a month lead up of like, will Draymond Green go or not go this summer? And there was a lot of deep conversations. And Draymond almost went to the Grizzlies. He was talking to me about this the other day, how he almost decided to sign with the Grizzlies. And there was a Steph Curry call in Hawaii where they were like discussing all this. Like there was just so much more, like you said, like debate and then just like
instead of like, Klay, were you able to get a Southwest flight out of Indy to get wherever you got to go?
I think there's a direct to Philly right now. Right. You're a Sixer now or whatever.
That really would have been amazing, seeing Draymond with the team that they and the Warriors have talked so much crap back and forth for the last 3 years. That would have been something. Seeing Draymond on the other side of that.
The only problem is that it wouldn't have been with Dylan Brooks also, but
that's true.
By the way, a little under the radar, and this is out of left field. Did you guys watch that Pacers-Rockets game at all last night?
No.
I know the Dylan Brooks list of hijinks is very long, so I don't think it even made the rounds on social media. But I happen to notice Tyrese is Halliburton, Fred's favorite NBA player, is giving it to Dylan late in the game. And the cameras, I just love when even my rudimentary lip reading skills come in handy. So Tyrese hits a shot, looks at Dylan Brooks, and is just flexing on him basically. And Dylan just looks at him and says, "Man, you're a bitch."
I like it.
Dylan Brooks.
That'll do it. Can I throw something out there right now, which is why I've been kind of silent for a couple minutes.
He's on the trade.
Pondering.
We have a trade. We have a trade that just happened.
We have the Fontecchio one.
Yes.
I already said this, Fred.
Yeah, we talked about this. We had a great
thanks for spacing out.
14-second segment on it. That was.
We need to address this.
If he says something
about Danny Ainge in Utah,
if he says something about how Utah, this means Utah is gonna like maybe you sell some pieces off, then we know he wasn't listening.
Fred, if we can't get a co-host to lock in, how are we gonna get the listeners to lock in?
Just hear me out. There's something to discuss here. Detroit is sending Washington, the better of Washington's or Memphis's second round pick, to Utah for this. That pick, that might be like the 32nd, 33rd pick in the draft. That's a really, really good second rounder. If Fontecchio, and it's just Kevin Knox and the 2024 second. So it's really just salary filler. If Fontecchio on an expiring, when you're going to have to pay him in restricted free agency next year, maybe not some ginormous number, but you'll have to pay him whatever the market dictates he's worth. It's not going to be super team friendly in all likelihood. He's probably just going to get what he's worth fairly. If Fontecchio is commanding basically as good of a second round pick as you're going to get, then I think we're going to start to see maybe first round picks change in value. Like it's going to be hard now for someone who wants to trade for Bruce Brown to be like, okay, well, we don't want to give up a first. I think Toronto's going to be like, well, Utah just got like the 31st, 32nd, 33rd pick in the draft coming up for Fontecchio. So like, I think maybe this is what could push some stuff over the edge of teams to be like, well, that's what it's dictating now.
Why did Detroit make that trade?
Yeah, there's that question too.
Well, they need They need shooting. Lord
No,
knows.
what they need is a 32nd pick in a draft. They should be
Exactly, but
undergoing
they
a
don't.
massive rebuild.
I mean, look, let's just base it on James Edwards' reporting that the Pistons have $60 million in room this upcoming summer, and they don't want
might
to
give it
use
to you, Fred Katz.
They don't want to use it just to take in bad contracts and get draft picks for it. They tried to do that the last 2 summers. And for what it's worth, the types of contracts they got in, the draft compensation they got back was not really anything worthwhile. It's not like they were getting firsts. They were taking on like Joe Harris and getting a second out of it and that kind of stuff. They were taking on Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel and getting a second out of it. It wasn't really anything that was needle moving to begin with. And they seem like they want to get better from where they are. Now, I think the most likely scenario is them getting better from where they are, but being like a 20 some odd win team and potentially sacrificing your future in order to just win 20 some odd games. But I think that's why Detroit did it. Fontecchio also, it should be said, like second year, he's actually a really quality player. He's a good shooter, good wing, but he's 28. Like he it's not like he's 22.
That's the thing. Like this trade makes more sense for, I don't know, a team in the playoffs. Like a team that's not.
Also, you want to have a good catch and shoot guy who can help your offense. Maybe play Marcus Sasser more than 6 seconds a game, who's shooting 40 some odd % from 3 and as a rookie having a really good year and legitimately looks like he's going to be a player. Maybe play him more than 16 seconds a game. Maybe try that before you give up a really good second round pick. Anyway, I could see that affecting the market to a degree. I don't know what that trade says about Utah, because I just feel like that's really good return.
That trade to me, like I said earlier, says like Utah selling, which is
all right, Fred. That was worthy analysis. I gave you a hard time, but that was good observations. I honestly though wonder if the takeaway isn't that it might give the market cold feet. You know what I mean? I mean, what are you going to give up 2 firsts for Bruce Brown? Like, it's going to change the calculus a little bit and, make me wonder how it impacts things. I want to tie a bow real quick, Slater, on before we kind of get to the tail end of the pod here on the Warriors front. Is Andrew Wiggins going anywhere?
I think it's on the table. The Warriors have certainly had open discussions about him. Even going back to, like they were trying to get in on some of the Pascal Siakam trades. And like, you got to have salary filler within that. So, for a while now, the problem for them is Andrew Wiggins' value is probably at its lowest it's been in a while. Obviously, he's having the worst season of his career, just like statistically. It's year 1 of a 4-year extension, and while there are some player for player like package type trades out there available to the Warriors, I'm not sure any of them would bring in players that would make the Warriors better this season than Wiggins, who has been playing better over the last month, is in their starting and closing lineup, has been able to play more with Jonathan Kuminga, which matters because if he was blocking Kuminga, I think there would be more of an appetite for the Warriors to trade him. And he was blocking Kuminga for a while, but no longer is. So assuming that they don't get, a player for player type trade that they haven't to this point been put at their doorstep, I can see them keeping him into the summer and, maybe revisiting in the summer. If he plays better down the stretch, he'll only have 3 years left on the deal by the summer. So I'm not ruling it out because, again, like they're open to it, but along with other, Klay Thompson, Chris Paul, other guys, that are potentially on the market for them, the offers haven't been very good.
Right. All right. Good stuff. All right, Fred, are you with us? We lose you again.
I mean, both.
Yeah.
I'm
okay.
with you. You lost
God
me.
Bless. What is going on here? You're the boss. Let's go. This is your segment time.
You sound like my teachers. My teachers would always tell me, Fred, you're not a distractor, but you are the distractee.
Well, distract us with your name game here. It's time to play Fred's trade deadline season, trade deadline week name game. What's the plan here, buddy?
That is a terrible name. Fred's trade deadline season, trade deadline week name game. Couldn't describe what we're doing less. Okay.
I set the bar low so that you could tell us what it is.
You set the bar low, and I'll make sure we don't even come close to meeting it. So here's the game on the table, gentlemen. What we're going to do is I am going to name 2 players whose names have been somewhere, trade adjacent, trade out there, however you want to frame it, but have been somewhere mentioned leading up to the trade deadline. I'm going to name 2 guys, and you guys tell me if you woke up from a coma at 3:01 p.m. on Thursday and you found
How much
out
is a nap?
that's a really long nap. That's too long of a nap, and this game is too dramatic for just
almost
a
a little
nap.
serious. That's personal.
All right, what? And we're answering who
If
we
you
think
woke
is
up
more
from
or
a
less
27
likely.
hour, if you woke up from a 27-hour unconscious period, however you want to frame it, at 3:01 p.m.
Concussion
on
protocol.
Thursday, exactly. And I told you upon waking up, one of these 2 guys got traded. You have to say which one would be your first guess, which one you think is the most likely to get
Okay.
traded.
All right,
And so I'm going to
let's
give
go.
2 names, and Samuel, I'm hitting you first. We are opening up
You've
with
been
a
hitting me this whole pod,
Bogdanovich.
man.
We are opening up with a Bogdanovich edition of this game, whatever you called it before. And we've got Bogdanovich and Bojan Bogdanovich.
And I'm picking the guy that I think would be on the move.
Is more likely to be on the move.
I'm going to go with Bojan. The Hawks appear, I think, to be leaning towards survival and play-in glory, and maybe don't trade DeJounte Murray, and by proxy, don't trade Bogdanovich. Although with this Detroit trade that we're talking about, I mean, you could say the same for the somewhat delusional perspective that they appear to be operating within, if that makes any sense. But
it makes a lot of sense, Sam. It
Yes.
makes a lot of sense because it does seem like he seems definitely like should be traded, right? And I
Right.
think he'd help a lot of teams.
And they've shown, that was the case last year in the summer, and they've held on to him. But if I got to pick, both sides, if we're being real, are somewhat delusional. The Hawks aren't actually going anywhere. I mean, they were so excited when they beat Miami in the play-in last year and gave the Celtics 2 losses in the first round, but ultimately, it didn't really matter much. It was the same result as the year before, but they're still pushing. The Pistons, I guess this is what happens when you pay your head coach, an exorbitant amount of money. You're going to try to compete. But, I mean, we'll see what the suitors look like, but I would pick Bojan because I think he's a guy that certainly contenders should be coming after.
Who's my twosome?
All right. That's a tough one because I think the Bogdanovich one is tough because I know the Hawks like their Bogdanovich and he's on a decent contract. And Bojan, you would think, would get traded, but it is akin to what Detroit was doing with Jeremy Grant when he had a year and a half left on his deal. And everybody thought, okay, that's a team near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Naturally, they're going to try to get something for him, and they could certainly get something good for him because he's a good player. And he's on a similar contract to what Grant was, about $20 million a year. And Detroit is saying not too important to the core, got to hold on. And then eventually, obviously, Detroit did trade Grant over that summer with a year left on his deal to Portland. And, we know what happened from there. So I wonder what will happen with Bogdanovich, but it's tough either way, but I thought the last names made it a good one. Next up, Anthony Slater, 2 point guards, Malcolm Brogdon and Tyus Jones.
Tyus Jones. Portland seems to be a little bit more protective of their vets, right? Jeremy Grant. There's been reports out there like how he's not really available. And Malcolm Brogdon even came out, talked to Jason Quick, and was like saying he liked it there. Almost mentoring Scoot Henderson. Whereas Washington seems to have stiff prices on some of their vets, but it isn't like, oh no, we need them around. It's more like please pay us these great prices, and you could definitely have a Kyle Kuzma. Just give us 3 first rounders or 2, whatever. Tyus Jones saying, I think he's just more available. Like I do think both are available, but I think there's more motivation from Washington to trade a Tyus Jones, and I think he'd help a lot of teams, right? Minnesota profiles is to me a perfect Tyus Jones team. San Antonio, I know people have floated out there as get Wemby a better point guard and get his Trey Jones' older brother, right? You could have the Jones brothers. So yeah, that's my answer.
As a quick follow, Slater, you mentioned the quick interview, no pun intended, with Malcolm Brogdon. He had a good anecdote in there about how Joe Cronin, the Blazers GM, the past couple of trades they've made with guys midseason that he would typically sit down with that guy and let him know kind of what was going on and get their perspective on their situation, that's Joe's style with players. So it was telling the way that Quick framed it in the piece that Malcolm shared that like that's not the type of dialogue they are having right now. So it seemed to reveal a lot of what you're talking about.
Sam, moving on.
Yes, sir.
All right, Sam, I'm giving you the Charlotte Hornets edition.
Okay.
We got Miles Bridges and Kyle Lowry. And to be clear, Kyle Lowry is technically a member of the Hornets. He's not really on the Hornets. And if they can't find a trade for him, we all have to imagine that they'll work a buyout with him and then he will go sign with a contender after. If the Hornets hold on to him, cannot find a trade, and work a buyout with him, that does not count to this. We're talking specifically who is more likely to be traded. So Kyle Lowry or Miles Bridges.
I would go with Miles there because, and I'm cheating and looking at the Hornets cap sheet. I mean, 29 million is a massive number to get to. And it seems like all the chatter about Kyle is potentially buyout scenarios that it will, eventually reach that point. Miles, man, what an uncomfortable calculus to consider. You know what I mean? Like with everything that he has done and the off-court issues. But I hate to sound cynical, kind of the other side of humanity never ceases to kind of let me down. I think teams that look for talent and teams that are looking, for some help are going to compartmentalize, that aspect of bringing on Miles Bridges. And as the deadline has gotten closer, there has been more and more reporting about teams, showing a little bit more interest. And it feels like the type of chatter that from a PR standpoint, common sense would tell you that that these teams are trying to keep this stuff quiet most of the time anyway. But I could see us being surprised by maybe the level of discussion that had taken place with Miles, because, that's the type of public PR media chatter that you don't want your team attached to in advance, because as we know, there's always the media / fan component of this, right? Like if it gets leaked, and this is totally hypothetical in my backyard. If the Kings were talking about Miles Bridges, well, then their fan base would weigh in immediately publicly on that. So long-winded way of saying that I'm curious what those talks have looked like, if they've been more extensive than we realize. He's a pretty damn good player, and at the end of the day, that matters. And Charlotte obviously, I think is looking to pivot off of him. So we'll see what happens there.
And another interesting part of the Miles Bridges situation is because he re-signed on the qualifying offer and is an unrestricted free agent after this year. First of all, he's got right of refusal on a trade because he signed the qualifying offer. And on top of that, whoever trades for him, I believe, doesn't get his bird rights, right? So it's not like you can trade for him and then say, okay, we got this.
Right.
We're just going to go over the cap and re-sign him. If you trade for him, it's a rental, or you're banking on the fact that he's going to want to come back for the mid-level
or a handshake deal. That.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know what his market, I honestly have no idea what his market is going to be like this summer because of all the stuff that you just mentioned, Sam, and because of, everything that's in his past. I honestly I don't know how the league is going to handle that, on top of the fact that a lot of the teams that have cap space are not good teams. For all we know, Detroit is going to use that cap space and just try to get Miles Bridges. He's from Flint, Michigan. Like, that's something that could make sense. He's still a young player, but I don't know what the market is going to be like. That's going to bog down his trade market, though, because a lot of these teams, for example, a team like Phoenix that's way over the second apron, maybe they try to trade for Miles Bridges, but that's not a team that's going to be able to use an exception to re-sign him because they're over the apron. They're just going to have to be able to pay him probably smaller than his basketball abilities would dictate. Slater.
Yep.
I got one for you. This is the expensive wings on long-term contracts edition. Kyle Kuzma and Andrew Wiggins.
We can throw Jeremy Grant in there. Who else can we
Let's throw Jeremy Grant in there. Let's throw Jeremy Grant in there. Make your pick. Or rank them. Rank those three. I want to hear the ranking of those three.
Yeah, I'll go Kuzma, Wiggins, Grant. I don't know. Again, I mentioned it earlier on the Tyus Jones. I just think there's more motivation from Washington, and it's probably just from location bias for me, just being around the Warriors situation. I'm just skeptical that a Wiggins trade is going to materialize that is good enough for them to, decide to do it. So that's why I have
Slater,
him
what's
low.
the level of discontent when it comes to Wiggins and just that Kuminga dynamic and the idea that, do they need to do something to kind of, release pressure from?
Well, the pressure has been released because Draymond Green came back playing really well, playing center, and unlocked this Wiggins Kuminga lineup that now they play together. Like Kuminga has been, while Wiggins has been playing next to him, been playing 35 minutes, 39 minutes, 34 minutes. Like, and there is no more organizational question on like, is it him or him? Like, it's Kuminga. Like Kuminga is like leaped in their pecking order into the future. So a month ago, when Steve Kerr continued to have to believe he needed to decide between the two because every bit of lineup data said that they stunk on the court together, and too often, to some people's liking, he would choose Wiggins over Kuminga, including Kuminga's liking, as was made clear. That is when I felt it was more likely there might need to be what you're talking about, like, oh no, like Wiggins just needs to be traded to get him out of Kuminga's way, where he's not really in his way nearly as much anymore. And in some ways, like they need big wings. Like when you talk to people in the Warriors, like, what do you need right now? Oh, 6'7" guys who can guard on the perimeter and can hit threes and like help. Like, what they
just
really
need him to play like Wiggins.
They need Andrew Wiggins from the 2022 playoffs. Like that,
Right.
that would really help their team right now.
Right.
So, you'd be trading Andrew Wiggins to try to get what Andrew Wiggins used to be. And I just believe their hope, even if it's not even deluding, it's just like, it's more likely that he just plays like that than whatever we get for him is not going to be Andrew Wiggins. So,
right.
And then Jeremy Grant third on that. It just doesn't seem like Portland wants to. Maybe I'm wrong though.
Two guys, by the way, that I wonder, I don't have clarity on what the Kings have in the works right now, but Grant and Kuzma both being guys that have been on the radar before. Kuzma, I think, recently has been something that where I hear his name pretty close to the team and seems real, but I don't know how the Wizards are approaching those talks or that situation with any team in the league. But just as a add-on there, those are two guys I think the Kings would have interest in.
Yeah, worth mentioning on Kuzma too. He's got a decreasing contract, whereas Grant has an increasing contract, and that can be a big difference for.
Not even just increasing, like big, like huge deal, bigger
than Kuzma's.
Yeah,
bigger than Kuzma's, huge deal. I mean, Portland is not in a position where they're trying to win now. They're not in a position where they're trying to win next year. Having one really big contract that honestly still isn't even really that close to a max because the max is so expensive. Having one really big contract on your books, if you're not a team that's trying to win, is like fine. It's manageable. They're not going to go into the tax. They would probably have to attach something to the Grant deal in order to get him out. They like him in their locker room. They like him as a guy. Like I don't see why there would be a trade that would make sense for him today. Maybe a couple years down the line, but I don't see it today. Amick.
Yes, sir.
Let's do a Brooklyn Nets wing edition. And let's go Royce O'Neal and Dorian Finney-Smith.
I mean, yes, these two guys are in every single sentence together lately when it comes to, coveted role players. I don't know how to pick between the two.
Royce O'Neal's price would be cheaper, right?
Royce is cheaper. Somebody made a hell of a point the other day about Royce, and I want to make sure I get this right, that, in this not parallel universe, but in this world where the Cavs don't continue playing as well as they have, and the gravitational pull of New York City on Donovan Mitchell, the relationship between Royce and Donovan was something where someone highlighted, I think, credit where credit's due. I think it was Brian Windhorst who famously had the meme about Royce and Donovan, and when the Jazz were moving him to Brooklyn, that dynamic, which I know is in the weeds, the idea was that you wouldn't let him go because Donovan could be out there on the horizon potentially. That's the closest I have to finding a separator between the two. Although, like Slater said, I'm trying to get the contracts in front of me here. Slater, who's more expensive of the two there?
Finney Smith has a year left after this one at like 11, I think, and then Royce O'Neal's unrestricted this summer.
I just mean it would probably take less for a team to get Royce O'Neal.
Yeah.
Also. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes him more likely to be traded, but
yeah, I mean, he feels
also,
like a rental who could help you, and for a contender. So, I mean, if I got to pick between the two, I guess I'll go with Royce and say goodbye to Donovan.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. They're both good winning players who play both sides of the floor, but O'Neal's unrestricted this summer, and Finney Smith has a very team-friendly number for next year. And if the Nets are trying to make a big move this summer to hopefully be more competitive next year than they are this year, they can count on Finney Smith being there.
Right.
And O'Neal, it's just like he's unrestricted. You don't know. And if a team wins 34 games and keeps Royce O'Neal and then loses him for nothing in restricted free agency when in a market that Simone Fontecchio just got, a top 35 pick, you're like, man, that is some asset mismanagement right there. So I would say Royce O'Neal as well. Slater, we're going to Chicago to wrap this one up. We're going to Chicago, and I'm going to give you two guys, one of whom everybody wants,
Alex Caruso,
and the Bulls just don't want to trade, and the other one, to my knowledge, the Bulls have absolutely no traction on, and I don't even know if the Bulls want to trade or not.
DeMar DeRozan.
DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso, and DeMar DeRozan.
Neither, right? I don't know. It just feels like the Bulls are doing what a lot of these teams are doing that we keep talking about, which is like chase play-in glory. The play-in, it has done so much. It actually has. Maybe we should just talk about that. Like, hasn't the play-in really impacted the deadline a lot? Feels like. But
at least the Bulls are doing it. It's funny. I watched them beat Minnesota. That was last night, right?
Yeah, last night, yeah.
And you're watching, and it'd been a minute since I locked in and watched a Bulls home game when you're kind of taking in the environment. And this has been a discussion all week long. The idea that the Bulls, even with their mediocrity from a business standpoint, don't have the incentive to blow it up because those Bulls fans, thank you to MJ and the 6 titles, like they remain rabid. And you watch that game.
Yeah, they do. How about when they were booing, a widow recently? So
yeah, that was untoward. But they, that Minnesota game, it's just coming through the television, just how lit that place was. And Caruso is making big plays at the end, and DeMar is getting his name called for the failed game winner in regulation. And it was a little bit of a capsule, if you will, of why they are hanging on here. We know the backstory when Arturas Karnisovas comes from Denver to Chicago. It gets a lot of praise early for putting together a team that was making some noise, and they have just been floundering since in mediocrity. And I'm with you, though, that it feels like they will choose to continue doing that. And DeMar is the one for me, not to interject here too much, but we focus so much on DeJounte Murray. Like DeMar's a guy that a contender should and could pivot to that would help. And even Fred, I know we've talked offline about how the Knicks see DeMar, and I get it. Like the Knicks don't want to take the ball out of Jalen Brunson's hands. That applies to DeMar. That applies to DeJounte. The Lakers, whoever else, man, like, my goodness, like DeMar's still got a lot left. I was reading some stuff today about just the analytics on him with the Bulls the last couple of years. He's been helping that team win on a pretty high level whenever they do win, and could help somebody. It is a little strange that there's not more noise, surrounding him.
I think the thing with DeMar is because of the style of player he is. This is more of a commentary on his style than his quality. Because of the style of player he is, he's someone who's a lot easier to incorporate over an offseason than he is midseason.
Yeah.
Because he commands the ball, because his shot profile is unconventional in today's day and age. And to be clear, I'm not even critiquing him for the shot profile because he has found a way to make it work. He gets to the line all the time. He has turned himself into a fantastic mid-range shooter. He is an efficient player. It's just that the shot profile is not of something that you're going to teach. So now all of a sudden, when you get DeMar, you have to realign your offensive ecosystem and maybe your defensive ecosystem, because he's not a defensive minded player. And that can be hard to do in the middle of a season when everyone's got their groove and everybody knows their roles and all that kind of stuff, where it's easier to do when you have an off season. You can map out a whole offense that's going to include him, and you can work on it through training camp and preseason and figure out how to do it. And I think that's something that a lot of teams consider when they talk about trading for DeMar in the middle of a year, as opposed to over an off season. He's unrestricted coming up. I guess it's possible the Bulls just hold on to him and re-sign him and trudge forward. It's a weird situation. Can I say one quick Bulls thing before we wrap?
Of course. Yeah.
Props to Kobe White.
Yeah.
My goodness. I think he should be in the MIP conversation.
Yeah, he is.
He has, my goodness, how much better has that guy gotten? Since November 22nd, he's averaging 23, 5, and 6. He's taking 8 threes a game and shooting like 42, 43% on those. His efficiency numbers are absolutely through the roof. He's playing winning basketball. Like, the Bulls are sneakily on a nice run. All that winning they've done without Zach LaVine, well, it's happening in part because Kobe White has been amazing. He's really become one hell of a player. And by the way, on that contract, 3 years, $33 million, what a steal. Like, Kobe White's career could have gone either way. He could have just been this microwave bench scorer who didn't really give you much else. And now all of a sudden he has transformed into a very good starting guard and clearly worked his ass off. He totally changed his game, and he is such a good player, is still really young. He might end up with a hell of a career.
You do wonder, my final Bulls thought there, and I wish we had our guy Darnell Mayberry on here to break it down because he covers the Bulls and so close to him. You wonder, like Fred, you mentioned DeMar is unrestricted. Kobe White is emerging, rising. There was a fascinating moment in that game I mentioned against Minnesota where they, I think Bulls called timeout. They got time to figure out what they want to do at the end of regulation. And the Bulls commentators talked about how they were, speculating like, well, of course you got DeMar DeRozan, but is this a pass the torch moment? Kobe White is cooking. Like, is this call going to Kobe White? And when they said it, I thought it was fascinating because when you put yourself out there from a commentary standpoint before the play, you run the risk of having it go completely the other way. And in fact, that's what happened. DeMar got the call. I wonder how, for Billy Donovan and the front office and that whole group, moments like that, where is Kobe White been so good that listen, with Zach LaVine out, I know like you've already lost firepower. So it's not like Kobe's going to carry the entire squad. But it does feel like, his emergence could force, certain decisions.
Yeah. Huge game last night in the comeback over Minnesota, 33 in that one.
Down 23, man.
Yeah. Like he is playing amazing basketball. The Bulls should be investing. They've already invested another contract in him, which is, if this is the player that he is, that is one of the most team-friendly contracts in the league. 3 for 33, who a guy's going to give you an efficient 22, 5, and 6 is unbelievable. That's less than the mid-level. Like, that's right. Unbelievable value. And you've already got the financial investment in him. Like, you got to give him the resource investment too, because he has been really good. You got to see everything that you have with him and give him every opportunity to succeed. He's shown that he deserves it.
Good stuff, gentlemen. Slater, you got anything else?
No, I was going to say, I got an East Coast game to cover tonight.
Yeah,
I love this Kobe White talk, but it's about time, boys.
It's about time. All right. Happy trade deadline week, everybody. By the time next week rolls around, hopefully we'll be unpacking a few more moves. Make sure you keep listening to the Athletic NBA Show stream to figure out what the hell is happening on Thursday morning, and we will be back with you next week. Thank you.